Next, we'd like to hear from Department of Public Service.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Lauren Knopper, L-O-R-E-N-K-N-O-P-P-E-R. My colleague Melissa Whitfield-Aslin, M-E-L-I-S-S-A-W-H-I-T-F-I-E-L-D-A-S-L-U-N-D. I should have called her with a smaller name. And my colleague Dr. Christopher Olson were retained by the Public Service Department to speak to you today about wind turbines and human health. The Public Service Department selected us through a competitive process, and here we are today to talk to you about this issue. Dr. Bronzaft, I was actually the author of the report that criticized your study, so perhaps we can, actually my word, perhaps actually we can chat after.
I would appreciate
Excellent,
that.
that'd be great.
My three lawyers told me that.
Excellent. Slide number 2, please. So Dr. Olson and I lead Intrinsik's Renewable Energy Health Team. Our team is made up of 7 people, 4 of which have PhDs. 1 is a medical doctor, 1 has a master's in public health, and the other has gone back to the University of Toronto to do her PhD actually in health impact assessment. Since 2009, our team has been involved in the issue of wind turbines and human health, and we've worked in this topic in a number of capacities. We've worked with developers, we've worked with regulators, and we're also well published on the matter. So far we have 5 articles that have been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals about the topic, and we have 1 about to be submitted. Slide 3, please. In 2011, Chris and I published our first article in an open access journal, which means you can freely get it if you would like, in the journal Environmental Health. It's been viewed over 30,000 times. It ranks 9th as the most viewed in this journal since 2013. It ranks 10th at all time for this journal, and it's been cited over 40 times. On average, the typical scientific article is cited once, so we're quite proud that this article received some coverage. Dr. Bronzaft mentioned this in her presentation. Mr. Horner, Brett Horner, lives in Ontario, Canada. He had a few criticisms of this paper. One was that we didn't necessarily agree about some of the conclusions of some of the references. And the other one was that I added a reference to a list of references that I shouldn't have added, which is correct. I added an extra reference. Next slide, please, number 4. In 2013, we published 2 other articles, one by my colleague Melissa, and in 2014 we have 2 others. Either this year or next we'll have our 6th coming out. Slide 5, please. So what do we know about wind turbines and human health? Well, overall, public attitude is generally overwhelming in favor of wind turbines. But this level of favor doesn't always come down to the local level. It does sometimes, but you don't always see this. Those opposed to wind turbines point to a number of issues. Human health is mainly the one that's raised. Sometimes there's property value, sometimes there's shadow flicker from the annoyance point of view, sometimes it's other issues. But human health is really the main one that comes up. Likely because a proportion of people that live near turbines self-report health effects that they attribute to living near said turbines. Slide 6, I believe. Yes. Self-reported symptoms generally include, as Dr. McConey mentioned, annoyance, sleep disturbance, tiredness, tinnitus, irritability. There's a long list. There's a researcher in Australia whose name is Simon Chapman, who has a running tally right now, and I think he's reported about 185 symptoms that people have reported by living near wind turbines. Now, this collection of effects is commonly called wind turbine syndrome. It's nomenclature developed by Dr. Nina Pierpont in her book, Wind Turbine Syndrome, that was published in 2009. If you haven't had a chance to read this book, I suggest you do. It gives you a nice sort of idea of the genesis of this issue. Now, the reason for the self-reported health effects is highly debated. Slide number 7, please. There are really 2 camps on the issue right now. One camp says that the health effects are related to wind turbine operation, really regardless of the setbacks that are in place. So is it the audible noise from wind turbines? Is it the inaudible noise from wind turbines? Is it shadow flicker? The other camp suggests that when turbines are sited properly, the health effects that people report are more likely related to subjective variables, things like attitude, visual cue, stress, expectations from the media, and economics. Slide 8, please. We do need to acknowledge, as the other speakers have, that environmental noise above certain levels is clearly related to adverse health effects. At 50, 60, 70, Dr. Bronzoff's work looking at subways up in the high 80s, 90 decibels and how they interfere with children's learning is well documented. Hearing, sleep, myocardial infarctions or cardiovascular issues, and annoyance are all related to high levels of environmental noise. We also know that noise from wind turbines can be annoying to some people and can be associated with sleep disturbance. And this is especially when noise from turbines is greater than 40 decibels, so greater than 40 dBA. Now this 40 dBA value is the same as the World Health Organization and Europe's nighttime noise guideline, which is a health-based value protective of people's sleep, particularly sensitive people, children, and the elderly. It is a health-based value. So for wind turbines, proper siting is key. I don't think anyone would advocate having a turbine close to a home that would be making 80 or 90 decibels worth of noise. That just wouldn't fly. So proper siting of turbines is key. Slide 9, please. So back to the debate. In terms of health effects related to wind turbine operation, let's look at some of the scientific literature. Right now, there are about 60, 65 maybe we're now pushing closer to 70 peer-reviewed scientific articles that have looked at wind turbines and human health. When Chris and I first published our article in 2011, there were only about 13 or 14. So the amount of literature, the amount of study that's being done about this topic is growing quite quickly. So in terms of health effects related to wind turbine operation, there are probably around 20, maybe a bit fewer than 20 related to this issue. The vast majority of these studies are found in one journal called the Bulletin of Science, Technology, and Society, and they're authored by a limited number of researchers. On the other side, in the other camp, they suggest that health effects are related to subjective issues when turbines are situated correctly. We have closer to 40 or 45 articles. They're published in a variety of journals by a variety of authors from a wide and diverse range of affiliations. I'd also like to point out that these authors are not saying that wind turbines can just be placed wherever developers feel like it. They acknowledge that noises above a certain level can be problematic, and that's why, again, proper siting is key. Slide 10, please. So you don't have to listen to me, at least for a little bit longer. My colleague Melissa is going to come up and she's going to talk to you about some of the key findings from these peer-reviewed articles. Thank you.
So based on our review of all of the evidence, so all of the peer-reviewed articles that were mentioned on the previous page, we've come to a few key conclusions about what you can say about wind turbines and human health. Let me just push ahead. There's one more thing on this slide. So the first key point is that the louder the noise is from wind turbines at a person's home, the more likely you are to notice the sound. So, slide 11, please. So, again, based on a Swedish study with over 750 participants, what they did was they asked people that were exposed to wind turbine noise in different sound categories outside their home whether they could hear wind turbine sound. And across the x-axis, it was along the bottom of the graph, you can see that the noise categories, how loud it was outside their home. And on the y-axis, or just on the side, you can see the proportion of people who reported they could hear it when they were outside. And so you can see there's a pretty steady increase when you get up to greater than 40 decibels, which is that number we keep talking about, the WHO night noise guideline. almost 80% of the people can hear the noise, which makes sense. So, so keeping that in mind, we'll move on to slide 12. So out of those people that can hear the noise, what we've talked about a lot today, is that some of those people are going to find that noise to be annoying. So slide 13. So here is some data that came from also survey respondents from Sweden and the Netherlands, and this is a compiled data set, based on a compiled data set of over 1,700 survey respondents. So we do have some studies that do include very large numbers of survey respondents. And so what they did in this study that came out in 2011 is they took all of that survey data and they created sort of dose response models on the number of people that are likely to be annoyed, which is the bluish line, and the number of people that are likely to be highly annoyed, which is the reddish line. And in the left-hand graph, it's when indoors, when inside their home, and on the right-hand graph is when outdoors. We're going to focus on the indoors one because that's the one that's going to be more related to when people are at home trying to sleep, trying to get rest. The other thing that's important to notice about these particular graphs is the noise scale on the bottom, like on the x-axis there in LDEN, is slightly different than the dBA that we have been talking about in most of the other numbers. So in this case, that 40 dBA number that we've been talking about a lot is more or less equivalent to 45 LDEN on this graph. So if you look at the left-hand graph for people indoors, inside their home, you have around 10 at 40 decibels, around 40 dBA, which is that 45 LDEN in this graph. You have around 10% of people being annoyed, and a little bit less than that, maybe 5% being highly annoyed. Slide 14. So another way of looking at this idea of the proportion of people who are going to be annoyed, depending on hearing the noise, is we go back to that Pedersen and Carson-Way study from 2007. So I think I said there's 750 participants, more or less. And for those same participants that said that they noticed, more and more people noticed the sound when outside their home as the noise level increased. You can see on the right-hand graph, that's the proportion of people that were reported being annoyed. So there's a large proportion of people in that second to last category, the 37.5 to 40 decibel category. About 60% of the people said that they could hear it when they were standing outside. But only around 5% of the people reported that they were annoyed by that amount of noise. So it's really important to keep in mind this sort of dose response issue, that above 40 decibels, which is that number we keep talking about in the right-hand graph, that's when you see a big jump in the percent of being annoyed, which is why agencies like the World Health Organization have set that as being a noise level that can be suitable for setting guidelines. Slide 15. The other thing to think about is when you hear 8% of people annoyed, 10% of people annoyed, is that a high number? How does that compare to what people in the community are already experiencing? And what we have found is that that level of annoyance, tends to be within the range of existing levels of community noise-related annoyance. So what does that mean? Slide 16. So again, in a study from the Netherlands in 2011, where they looked at that dose-response relationship between noise level and annoyance, and they were trying to figure out what was an acceptable level of wind turbine noise to have that would result in a level of annoyance that would represent a trade-off between being able to have the benefits of wind turbine noise without causing undue stress on the community. So they selected at 45 dB LDEN, which again is more or less equivalent to that 40 dBA number we keep talking about, that they would expect 5.2% of people to be severely annoyed. And again, that's not 5.2% of the entire population. That's 5.2% of the people at that highest noise level that are living right on the edge of the noise limit. And that's well below 10% of annoyance, which is used in the Netherlands particularly to set existing road and railway traffic noise limits. So what is also interesting about this number, this 8 to 10%, is that when you look at data that's available for larger communities, so when surveys have been done in the UK and asked just general people living in any community about their noise annoyance, that about 10% of people report being annoyed by noise in general. And even in Canada, to get some more North American specific data in, 8% of the general population, just any adult Canadian, 8% reported being very or extremely annoyed by noise in general. And even in smaller communities where you think they might have less annoyance, so communities with less than 5,000 people in Canada, 11% of people reported being moderately or extremely annoyed by traffic noise specifically. So these are levels of annoyance that are comparable to what already exists. So slide 17. Again, as has come up in several of the other presentations, annoyance to noise in general, but to wind turbine noise as well, is related not only specifically to the noise level you experience, but to subjective factors such as attitude, visual cue, stress, and expectations. So slide 18. So here's a quick overview of a few studies that touch on this topic. The first study from Patterson and Personway from 2004, they showed that when you control for similar levels of noise, that there's a driver of annoyance related to being able to see the turbines, how you feel about them aesthetically, and existing attitudes. The two studies there, led by Fiona Crichton, found that when you provide people with positive information about wind turbines or infrasound, and then expose them to noise, they tend to report positive or a lack of changes in their experience. But if you provide them with negative information before they're exposed, they're more likely to report negative experiences. The fourth study used virtual reality to explore the impact of things like visual cues, so even the color of the turbines, and they found that can have a big impact on the annoyance of people. And that last study by Simon Chapman from Australia found that the impact of people being provided with negative information again can really increase the complaints around wind turbines. So moving on to slide 19. So similarly, as has also been discussed, one of those non-noise factors that has been shown to have an impact on the rate of annoyance is economic benefit. So people who economically benefit from wind turbines have significantly decreased levels of annoyance compared to individuals that received no economic benefit. Slide 20. So that's a key interesting point, because generally those people that are receiving economic benefit, those are people that are leasing their property to the wind turbine developers. So they tend to live fairly close to the turbines. They most likely can see the turbines, and they're going to be in the upper category of sound exposure as well due to their proximity. And so within reason, we find that those people tend to report being less annoyed, which is going to be related to their attitude. So if you look at this graph that says, or this table that says table 4, there's a line, the top line shows the percentage of people that responded to these different categories with no economic benefit, and the second line shows the proportion of people that are responding when they had an economic benefit. And if you move out to rather annoyed and very annoyed, which are typically the categories that we're talking about when we're talking about annoyance, There are 4% of the people that had no economic benefit were rather annoyed, and 4% were very annoyed, but 0% of the people with the economic benefit were in either of those categories. Another useful, and this study was based on almost 1,950 survey respondents. So again, it's a fairly large sample size. The other thing that was really interesting, that as a side note, that came out in this study was for those people that received no economic benefit, when they were asked if they had a sleep disturbance, what was it that disturbed their sleep? Even in a rural environment, around 12% of people reported that they were disturbed by people or animals. Around 12% of people reported that they were disturbed in the night by traffic or mechanical sounds. And only 6% of people reported that they were disturbed by wind turbines. So even people that are having sleep disturbances are pointing the finger more to existing sources of noise. Slide 21. So in our review of this body of evidence, both on the pro and con side, we've determined that based on all of this evidence, the weight of evidence suggests that when cited properly, you have appropriate noise guidelines, when you protect people from inappropriate amounts of noise, that your wind turbines are not going to cause adverse health effects. And again, we're not the only ones that have reviewed this data and come to these conclusions. There's a number of government and medical agencies, which are listed here, which reviewed the same body of data and have come to the same conclusions. So I'm going to switch you back to Lauren for slide 22.
So one of the things that we did in our last peer-reviewed study, it just came out a couple of months ago, and if anyone's interested in the studies that I mentioned that we've published, I can either point you to the web links because they're publicly available, or I can sort of give you the other articles as well. This one we also did publish as an open access journal, so you can access it. One of the conclusions that we had, one of the things we wanted to do, was come up with health-based siting recommendations. Because there's a lot of debate going back and forth about should turbines be 10 kilometers from homes, or 2 kilometers from homes, or should it be 40 decibels, or 60 decibels? What is an acceptable, if you will, setback? So we came up with six health-based siting recommendations. The first one is that we suggest that setback should be sound-based rather than distance-based. You can have the same sound at a range of different distances. And so you can't really control where people live, but you can control what noise they're hearing. So we suggest that setbacks should be based on sound rather than based on distance. The second point is our preference is that sound emissions from turbines should be equal to or lower than 40 dBA outside of homes, not including existing noise that's in the environment, just strictly wind turbine noise, for non-participating individuals, for not those people that are leasing their lands to developers. Our third point is that we really, really think that post-construction monitoring is key. So when you go through the approval process, you have noise engineers that model and predict what the sound level is going to be at people's homes from the operation of the wind turbines. And what really needs to be done is ensuring that what those models predict are either correct or overly conservative. And the only way to do that is to go out and do post-construction monitoring to ensure that what the engineers have modeled is correct. Point number 4, we're not against sound pressure levels in that 40 to 45 decibel range outside of people's homes, not taking into account ambient noise. But we suggest at this point that you need strong community consultation, strong community support, because we've shown, as Melissa has talked about, that it's not only noise that's related to annoyance, but visual cue and attitude. So if you're starting to get into that 40 to 45 decibel range, where studies have shown you're starting to get increases in annoyance beyond what is just typically expected from day-to-day life, you can sort of combat that by speaking with people, talking about the project, talking about the pros, talking about the cons, and getting community support. Slide number 23, please. We don't support setbacks that are greater than 45 decibels. Wind turbine noise only, which is typically what's modeled, at people's homes, not including ambient. Because the literature that's out there, the weight of evidence that's available about wind turbines and human health supports that levels of annoyance and sleep disturbance are going to be above what you typically expect when you're getting above 45 decibels from wind turbine noise alone. Saying that, when ambient noise is taken into account, because as the wind blows, the noise goes up, as leaves rustle, as things happen in life, noise can increase, we suggest that when wind turbine noise can be 45 decibels, and you have to combine this with ambient noise. So if you take wind turbine noise at 45 decibels and add ambient noise to it, the setback would be no greater than 55 decibels. So that would be a 10 decibel difference between ambient and what you'd be generating from a wind turbine. And this is for non-participating and participating receptors together. Based on the evidence that suggests long-term exposure to over 55 decibels can be related to annoyance, sleep, and cardiovascular effects. So in order to be protective of people's health with the operation of wind turbines, these are some of the setbacks that were suggested, especially for the board to keep in mind when you're trying to decide what you'd like to do for the state. Slide 24, please. I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Melissa and I are both very pleased to be here. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact myself or my colleague, Chris. And again, if anyone is interested in the papers we have published, I'd be more than welcome to share them with you and we can talk about them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.